Close your eyes, dear listener, and imagine yourself standing at the edge of a golden desert. The sun has just slipped below the horizon, leaving the sky painted in hues of violet and deep rose. The air is still warm, but a cool breeze brushes against your face as the stars begin to shimmer one by one in the vast canopy above. Before you lies a land wrapped in mystery, where the Nile flows like a silver ribbon through fields of green, and beyond its gentle banks stretch endless seas of sand. Somewhere in that desert, hidden by time, are stories of kings who called themselves gods, of queens whose whispers shaped empires, and of ordinary men and women who dreamed, loved, and sometimes suffered beneath the weight of eternity. Tonight, we are not here to rush. We are not here to hurry through the pages of history as though they were mere notes on parchment. No, tonight, we walk slowly, gently. With each step, we will sink into the soft sands of ancient Egypt, listening not only to what is written in stone, but also to the silences that linger between the lines. This is not just a tale of temples and tombs. It is a lullaby of civilization. A story for dreamers. A gentle walk through the sands of a time so distant, yet still echoing in every grain of desert beneath your feet. So breathe deeply, let the world outside fade away, and prepare to drift with me into the dreaming heart of Egypt, long before steel and glass cities pierced the skies of our modern world, long before trains rattled across continents and ships circled the globe. There was Egypt, the gift of the Nile. Imagine standing on the riverbank thousands of years ago. It is early morning, and a light mist rises from the water. The surface of the Nile glimmers like molten gold as the first rays of sunlight fall across it. The river carries with it the songs of fishermen, the gentle splash of oars, and the low creak of reed boats gliding by. To your left stretch farmlands, dark and rich with life, where farmers guide wooden plows pulled by oxen. Their children laugh as they chase each other between rows of barley and wheat. To your right lies the desert, vast, silent, and eternal. It is a place where the wind sings in hushed tones, where the footprints of those who cross are quickly swallowed by the shifting sands. This balance between river and desert, between life and silence, shaped everything. Without the Nile, there could be no Egypt. Without the desert, there could be no eternity. The people who lived here felt this truth in their bones. To them, life itself was a cycle of rising and falling waters, of harvest and hunger, of death and rebirth. But Egypt was not merely a land, it was a dream of permanence. The pharaohs built temples that rose like mountains of stone, covered in carvings that told their stories for all time. In these carvings, gods walked beside men, and men themselves became gods. Each monument whispered the same promise, that Egypt would never fade. And yet, behind the grandeur, there were human lives. A mother humming softly as she grinds grain at dawn. A scribe bent over his scroll, his lamp flickering as he carefully dips his reed pen in ink. A soldier standing guard by torchlight, his thoughts wandering to the family he left behind in a quiet village. These small, fragile moments of humanity are just as much Egypt as the pyramids themselves. And tonight, as we walk slowly through this land, we will pause to notice them, to breathe with them, to feel what it might have been like to live in the embrace of the Nile's eternal song. Imagine, dear listener, that you are drifting further into this dream of Egypt. The air is calm, and the moon glows like polished alabaster, casting its silver light upon the Nile. The river is quiet at night, but not silent. If you listen closely, you can hear the lap of water against reed boats tied to the shore. You can hear the whisper of palms swaying gently in the night breeze. Somewhere, far off, a flute plays, a shepherd calming his flock as the stars deepen overhead. By day, Egypt is a land of brightness, but by night it becomes a land of whispers. Tonight, we walk slowly through its timeless streets. The Nile was everything. Without it, there would have been no crops, no food, no empire. Each year, the river would swell with the rains that fell far to the south. Its waters would rise and spill into the fields, leaving behind a dark, rich soil. Farmers called this soil the gift, and truly it was. Picture them at dawn, men with bare feet, sinking into the wet earth, sowing seeds by hand. Women carrying baskets filled with onions, lentils, and barley. Children running between rows, their laughter rising into the clear morning air. The cycle of planting and harvest was not just labor, it was a rhythm, a heartbeat of the land itself. The river was also a highway. Sleek wooden boats sailed up and down its waters. Some carried stone for building, dragged from distant quarries. Some carried papyrus rolls, jars of honey, or baskets of figs. On the decks, sailors sang songs to keep time with the oars, their voices rising and falling with the splashes. At night, the river became a mirror. The stars reflected upon its surface, as though the heavens themselves had bent down to kiss the earth. Step away from the river now, into the villages that dotted its banks. Here, mud brick homes stood close together, their walls painted in pale whitewash. Doors were made of wood, often carved with protective symbols. Courtyards were filled with clay jars, woven mats, and low wooden stools. Inside, the air smelled of bread baking on clay ovens. Mothers hummed lullabies to infants swaddled in linen. Grandparents told stories to children, stories of gods who created the world, of animals that spoke, of heroes who crossed deserts and seas. Life was simple, yet rich in rhythm. At sunrise, people worked. At sunset, they gathered to share meals, to laugh, and to listen. By night, the desert wind swept cool across the land, and the stars stretched endlessly overhead. But Egypt was not only fields and villages. It was also temples, vast and towering, where the gods themselves were believed to dwell. Picture a temple at Karnak, its columns rising so high they seemed to touch the very sky. Painted in brilliant colors, carved with symbols of falcons, cobras, and lotus flowers, the walls told stories in silence. Priests moved quietly, their linen robes brushing against the stone floors. The smell of incense filled the air, mingling with the sound of low chants. The gods of Egypt were many: Ra, the sun; Isis, the mother; Osiris, the ruler of the dead; Horus, the falcon. To the people, these gods were not distant. They were present in every moment. In the rising of the sun, in the flooding of the river, in the quiet breath of the night. And at the center of it all was the pharaoh. To his people, he was not just a man, but a bridge between gods and mortals. His word was law. His image carved into stone, his name meant to last forever. The pyramids and eternity. And then, there were the pyramids. Silent giants of stone rising from the desert. Even in the moonlight, their shapes cast long shadows across the sands. Imagine standing before one, as workers carried blocks of limestone, straining beneath their weight. Ropes creaked, sledges groaned, and thousands of hands moved in unison. The building of a pyramid was not just construction. It was devotion, a gift to eternity. To the Egyptians, death was not an end but a passage, a doorway into another life. The pyramids were stairways for the soul, meant to guide kings into the heavens. Inside, walls were covered with spells, maps, and prayers. Food, treasures, and even boats were placed within, so the pharaoh might live again in the afterlife. For those who built them, the pyramids were reminders that life was fleeting, but memory was eternal. Whispers beneath the grandeur. Yet beneath this grandeur lived another Egypt. Not of stone and power, but of whispers. A farmer who lost his harvest to a poor flood. A soldier whose family wept as he marched away. A scribe who wondered if the words he wrote would ever truly be remembered. These, too, were Egypt, quiet lives caught in the shadows of greatness. And among these whispers, there were sometimes stories of bitterness, envy, and revenge. For where there is power, there is always someone who desires more. As we walk deeper into this land of dreams, we begin to feel the gentle tension between life and ambition, between peace and conflict. Egypt, so eternal in stone, was fragile in its people. And it is from this fragility that our story now begins to unfold. The sands of Egypt shimmer by day, but at night, when the torches flicker in stone halls, the desert whispers a different story. It is not always the gods who speak in those whispers. Sometimes, it is men. Sometimes, it is envy. The pharaoh's court. Picture a grand hall lit by oil lamps, their flames swaying gently against carved stone walls. The air smells of incense and warm beeswax. Musicians pluck quiet notes from harps while servants pour wine into polished goblets. At the center of this world sits the pharaoh, radiant in linen robes, a golden collar across his chest, and the double crown of Egypt upon his brow. He speaks little, but when he does, the room stills. Every eye is fixed on him, every ear tuned to the rhythm of his voice. But behind bowed heads and lowered eyes, thoughts move in silence. Among courtiers and nobles, ambition grows like reeds along the Nile. Some are content with their share of power, but others, always others, hunger for more. The rivalry. Among these men was one high official, once loyal but now restless. He had risen from humble beginnings, serving as a scribe before climbing the ladder of favor. His name was spoken with respect in the markets and with unease in the court. He had wealth, estates, servants, and yet, it was not enough. For while the pharaoh's word carried the weight of the gods, this man dreamed that one day, his own word might carry the same. In the silence of his chambers, he studied the movements of the court. He noticed which generals looked tired, which priests whispered together after ceremonies, which nobles flinched when the pharaoh's name was spoken. Small cracks in the foundation of loyalty. Small cracks he might widen. The seed of revenge. But the story of this official was not born merely from ambition. Beneath his hunger lay a wound, an old betrayal. Years ago, he had presented the pharaoh with a vision, a new temple carved into the cliffs by the Nile, one that would shine brighter than all others. He had drawn plans, summoned artisans, promised wonders. But another man, a rival, had claimed the idea as his own. The pharaoh had praised the rival, granted him lands, and written his name in stone. The official's work, his vision, his pride, erased. Though outwardly he bowed and offered praise, in his heart grew a quiet fire. Not rage that shouted, but rage that smoldered. Not the kind of anger that strikes quickly, but the kind that waits, patient as the desert sun, for the right moment. A dreaming Egypt, a restless heart. Meanwhile, the land around the Nile slept peacefully. Villagers prayed to the gods for floods that would nourish their crops. Children laughed in narrow streets, their voices carrying into the night air. Priests whispered hymns in shadowed temples. Egypt itself dreamed of eternity. But inside the palace, among the columns and painted walls, one man could not rest. His dreams were filled not with gods, but with revenge. With the image of his rival praised where he should have been praised. With the sound of applause stolen from his ears. With the thought that perhaps, someday soon, the sands of Egypt might remember his name above all others. A subtle beginning. And so it began. Not with armies, not with war, but with whispers. A quiet word here, a gentle suggestion there. He spoke to generals of the pharaoh's growing age. He reminded priests of ceremonies neglected. He suggested to scribes that prophecies were not always fulfilled. The words were small, soft as drifting sand. But sand, over time, can bury monuments. Egypt's story was shifting. From the calm of temples and riverbanks to the shadowed corners of ambition. The official's wound, his quiet fire, was beginning to shape the destiny of men greater than himself. The desert listened. The Nile flowed. And in the stillness of night, Egypt, eternal Egypt, held its breath. The spreading whispers of the Nile. The Nile never rushed. Its waters flowed steadily, patiently, nourishing the land with every rise and fall. But unlike the river, whispers could spread quickly. Once set free, they drifted like smoke, curling through halls, slipping beneath doors, and resting on ears that longed to listen. Whispers in the palace. By day, the pharaoh's court appeared calm. Processions marched, musicians played, scribes bent over scrolls. The temple still filled with offerings, and the nobles still bowed deeply before the throne. Yet beneath this surface, the mood had begun to shift. The official, the man with the quiet fire of revenge, had learned the power of silence. He no longer argued openly, no longer sought attention with grand designs. Instead, he let suggestion do his work. At banquets, he leaned toward a general and murmured, "Do you not feel the weight of your armor growing heavier? Has the pharaoh forgotten your victories?" To priests, he whispered, "The gods must be restless, perhaps offerings have been neglected. Perhaps the balance between the heavens and the Nile trembles." To scribes, he sighed, "Strange, how prophecies once carved into stone now seem less certain, less remembered." Each word was soft, never enough to raise alarm, but enough to plant seeds. And seeds, once sown, take root. The river as witness. Meanwhile, Egypt itself went on, unaware of the currents stirring in its palaces. The river carried grain boats northward, their sails full of warm desert winds. Farmers bent their backs in the fields, singing to keep time with their labor. Children floated reed boats along irrigation canals, their laughter echoing across the water. The land was at peace, but peace is often most fragile when it seems unbreakable. The Nile had seen it before, dynasties rising, dynasties falling, and now it watched again, silently, as the balance began to tilt. Growing unease. In the court, unease thickened like summer heat. Generals began to speak of soldiers growing restless, longing for greater rewards. Priests noticed fewer offerings arriving at the temples, as farmers struggled to meet quotas. Merchants grumbled in markets, their goods taxed heavily to fund projects whose glory they would never see. The pharaoh, radiant in his throne, did not yet sense the cracks beneath his feet. To him, Egypt was still eternal. To him, the gods still favored his reign. But those around him, those who stood in his shadow day after day, began to wonder. And the official watched it all with quiet satisfaction. The desert's patience. Far from the palaces, the desert stretched in silence. Dunes shifted with the wind, swallowing the footprints of travelers, erasing their paths as though they had never been. The official often walked there at night, leaving behind the noise of the court. He would stand beneath the stars, feeling the stillness of eternity around him. The desert, like his own heart, knew how to wait. It did not need to rush. One grain of sand at a time, one whisper at a time, it reshaped the world. Tensions at the banquet. The true signs of escalation appeared one evening, during a banquet. The hall glowed with torchlight, shadows dancing along carved pillars. Musicians played, dancers moved with grace, and the smell of roasted meats and honeyed wine filled the air. The pharaoh laughed, raising his cup. But as the official watched, he saw something else, eyes that did not shine as brightly as they once had. Smiles that faltered too quickly. Nobles who once leaned eagerly forward now leaned back, their gazes drifting. The whispers had begun their work. Trust, once solid, had thinned. Loyalty, once deep, now wavered. The smoldering fire. The official did not strike. Not yet. He did not need to. Like embers hidden beneath ashes, his revenge smoldered quietly. The fire was spreading, unseen but certain. Egypt was vast. Its monument seemed unshakable, its gods eternal. But even the strongest stone could crack, given time. Even the Nile, eternal as it was, could flood too high, or fall too low. And so the land waited, holding its breath. The pharaoh still sat upon his throne, but the ground beneath him had begun to shift. Egypt, the gift of the Nile, was stepping quietly into a new chapter, one shaped not by swords, but by whispers. Whispers can spread like mist, light and unseen. But sooner or later, the mist gathers. It thickens. It becomes a fog, and in that fog, men can lose their way. Egypt, steady and eternal as it seemed, now stood in that very fog, the moment before clarity, the moment before change. Signs in the sky. It began not in the palace, but in the heavens. One night, as priests kept vigil on the temple roof, the moon darkened. A shadow crept across its face, and the stars seemed to dim. People in villages looked up in fear. Mothers pulled children close, whispering prayers. Farmers set down their tools, staring at the sky, as if the gods themselves had turned away. In truth, it was but an eclipse. But to the people, it was an omen. And omens, once believed, are powerful. The priests hurried to the palace. Their voices trembled as they told the pharaoh that the balance of Ma'at, the order of the world, was in danger. Something was amiss. Somewhere, Egypt had strayed from harmony. The pharaoh listened, calm and steady, but in the dark corners of the hall, eyes gleamed. For those who already doubted, the omen was proof enough. A murmur becomes a voice. The official who had waited so long, who had planted whispers like seeds in the sand, now saw them blossom. What had once been quiet murmurings became open discussions. Nobles spoke more boldly, questioning decisions. Generals lingered longer in hushed groups. Merchants in the markets repeated stories they barely understood, weaving them into gossip that spread like fire in the dry season. Even the servants, moving silently with pitchers of water and platters of food, noticed the tension in the air. They carried news from chamber to chamber, their own whispers, uniting the palace in unease. The pharaoh's isolation. For the pharaoh, the world grew quieter. Where once his court had echoed with eager voices, now it seemed hollow. Those who had once leaned forward with admiration now bowed too quickly, speaking too little. The laughter of banquets no longer rang true. At night, in his private chambers, he would stand at the window and gaze across the darkened Nile. Torches flickered on the water's edge, and beyond them stretched the desert, endless and still. He had always believed himself eternal, as every pharaoh must. But for the first time, a shadow touched his thoughts. The official's hand. The official moved carefully. He did not yet reveal his ambition, but his presence grew stronger. He offered counsel at just the right moment, spoke with sympathy to the right ears. He comforted those who doubted, while gently widening their doubts. Like the desert wind, he shifted the sands without being seen. And then, when he sensed the time was right, he took a step further. He began to question. Not just in private, but in subtle public ways. He spoke of the gods' displeasure. He sighed at the burden of taxes. He shook his head at omens in the sky. Each gesture was small, but together, they were a tide the pharaoh could not see, or chose not to see. The breaking moment. The turning point came during a ceremony at the great temple. The pharaoh stood before the sacred fire, offering incense to the gods. Priests chanted, nobles watched, the people gathered in awe. And yet, when the flames sputtered, a mere gust of wind snuffing them for a moment, the crowd gasped. It was nothing, a chance of nature. But the silence that followed was heavy, too heavy. In that silence, someone, no one could say who, whispered, "The gods have turned away." It was enough. The people shifted uneasily, priests exchanged glances, and even the nobles held their breath. The pharaoh lit the fire again, calm as ever, but the moment had passed. The doubt had settled. Egypt holds its breath. From that day, the palace was different. The air itself seemed thick, heavy with expectation. Every sound echoed louder, the clink of a goblet, the shuffle of sandals, the murmur of voices behind a curtain. The official knew, the tide had turned. The pharaoh's image of eternity had cracked. The people, the priests, even the generals had begun to wonder. And once people begin to wonder, it is only a matter of time before they begin to choose. Egypt stood at the edge of change, the sands shifting beneath the throne. The pharaoh still wore the crown, but the shadow of doubt had fallen across his brow. The desert waited. The river flowed. And destiny, like the stars above, prepared to shift its course. The silent struggle beneath the stars. The gathering storm. The days that followed the temple fire grew heavier with every sunrise. The Nile, eternal and patient, flowed on, but within the palace walls, time seemed to slow. Every meeting, every glance, every whispered word carried weight. The pharaoh still appeared strong, robed in gold, crowned with the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, his voice calm and unwavering. Yet even the strongest stone shows hairline cracks before it breaks. The official saw those cracks, and in them, he planted himself like a reed in the water, bending but never breaking. The council hall. One evening, the pharaoh summoned his court. Torches burned brightly against the polished stone columns, casting tall shadows that stretched across the floor like watchful spirits. Nobles, priests, and generals gathered in their ranks, their eyes fixed upon the dais where the pharaoh sat. His voice was steady as he spoke. "We are Egypt," he said, the words echoing. "We are order, we are balance, we are Ma'at. Yet I hear whispers of doubt. Whispers that the gods have turned their gaze. But the gods do not turn. It is we who falter when we forget who we are." The words were strong. They carried the weight of kingship. And yet, in the silence that followed, the echo felt thin. Then, from among the nobles, a voice spoke. Calm, respectful, but steady. It was the official. "My king," he said, bowing low, "Egypt stands eternal, yes. But even the mightiest river must be cared for, its banks strengthened, its waters guided. The people look to you, yet they hunger. They pray for signs, yet the skies darken. Perhaps the gods speak through these shadows, urging us to listen." It was not defiance. It was not rebellion. But it was doubt, spoken aloud in the sacred council. The pharaoh's eyes narrowed, though his face remained composed. "And what do you hear, servant of Egypt?" he asked. The official lowered his gaze, his voice smooth as silk. "I hear the hearts of the people. And they are restless." The murmur of the court. The silence that followed was not silence at all. It was the rustle of robes, the shifting of feet, the unspoken agreement that spread through the hall like wind across sand. The priests lowered their eyes. The generals said nothing. Even those loyal to the pharaoh hesitated, unsure. The crown on his head still gleamed, but the weight of it seemed heavier than ever. For in that moment, the pharaoh stood not as eternal Egypt, but as one man, facing shadows he could not command. The night of decision. That night, the palace did not sleep. Servants moved quietly, carrying lamps through the darkened halls. The air was heavy with the scent of oil and smoke. Somewhere, a harp played softly, its notes drifting like sighs. In his chamber, the pharaoh stood alone, gazing once more at the Nile. Its waters caught the moonlight, silver and endless. He thought of the kings who had come before him. Mighty rulers whose names were carved in stone. He thought of the gods, distant yet eternal. And he thought of his people, whose trust had been shaken by shadows and whispers. Beyond the chamber, the official waited. Not in open defiance, not with armies at his back, but with patience. He knew the tide of men's hearts was already turning. He did not need to strike. He only needed to be still, and let the river carry him forward. The silent struggle. There was no great battle. No clash of swords. No cries of war. Egypt's climax was quiet, like the closing of a door. The next morning, when the court gathered once more, the pharaoh's seat was filled, but not with strength. His face was calm, yet distant, as though he carried the weight of centuries upon his shoulders. The official stood nearby, his presence steady, his voice measured. The nobles listened more closely to him now. The priests nodded when he spoke. The generals considered his counsel. Without raising his hand, without declaring himself, the official had become the voice they trusted. And in that moment, the balance shifted. The pharaoh remained crowned, yet the throne no longer belonged wholly to him. It was shared, quietly, invisibly. Power had passed from one man to another, like the Nile passing through unseen channels beneath the earth. The eternal river. Outside, the Nile flowed on, indifferent to the affairs of men. Children played at its banks. Fishermen cast their nets, farmers watched the Waters rise and fall with the season. To them, life was as it always had been. Egypt endured. But within the palace, those who watched knew something had changed forever. The pharaoh, once unquestioned, now walked in shadow. The official, once silent, now spoke with the weight of destiny. The climax was not thunder or flame. It was the soft settling of sand, the quiet turning of the river's course. And in that stillness, Egypt stepped into a new age. The quiet after the turning. Change, when it comes, is not always marked by the roar of drums or the march of armies. Sometimes it is as soft as the settling of dust after a desert wind. In the palace, after that night of silent struggle, the days moved forward with a new stillness. The pharaoh continued to sit upon his throne, his crown gleaming in the torchlight, his voice calm as he gave his decrees. Yet beneath the surface, everyone knew the truth. The court looked to another voice now, a softer one, a quieter one, yet strangely more certain. The official did not need to proclaim victory. He did not need to seize the throne with his hands. For Egypt itself, its nobles, its priests, its generals, its whispering people, had already shifted toward him. Power had changed its shape, as water changes the riverbank, without sound, without haste. The pharaoh's reflection. At night, the pharaoh still gazed upon the Nile. From his window, the river, calm and eternal, no longer seemed to reflect his own eternity. He thought of the omens, the whispers, the fire that had sputtered in the temple. He thought of the trust of his people, once as unshakable as stone, now as fragile as sand beneath the wind. And yet, he did not rage. He did not strike out in anger. For he knew, perhaps more deeply than any other, that Egypt was greater than one man. Egypt had always been so. Kings came and went, but the river flowed, the desert stretched, the pyramids stood. In his heart, he accepted the truth. His reign, though still crowned, had passed into shadow. And in that acceptance, there was peace. The official's patience. The official, too, did not boast. He moved with the same patience he had shown from the beginning. His voice in council remained calm, his advice measured, his gestures careful. He did not claim to be ruler, nor did he wear the trappings of kingship. Yet his words carried more weight than the gold of the crown. He had waited through the years like the desert waits for rain. Now the rain had come, and quietly, he let it soak into the earth. His revenge was not fire, nor blade, nor blood. It was simply this, to stand where once he had been overlooked, to be the voice where once he had been silenced. The land of Egypt. Outside the palace, life continued. The farmers still guided their plows through the fertile soil, grateful for the river's gifts. Children still laughed along the banks, chasing each other through the reeds. The markets bustled with traders calling their wares, the temples filled with prayers and incense. The land was unchanged, and yet, changed forever. For history had turned a page, not with battle cries, but with whispers. And those whispers, though soft, would echo through time, the eternal rhythm. As seasons passed, Egypt endured, as it always had. The stars wheeled overhead, patient and silent. The pyramids cast their shadows on the sands, unmoving. The Nile swelled and shrank with the rains, its rhythm steady and sure. The pharaoh aged, his crown still resting upon his brow, though it seemed lighter now, less a symbol of eternal power and more a reminder of fleeting time. The official grew older too, his wisdom deepening, his influence unshaken. Together, in a balance neither had chosen, they guided Egypt into its future. The gentle fade. And so the story softens. The struggles of men, the whispers of power, the omens in the sky, all fade like footprints in the sand, smoothed away by the desert wind. What remains is the quiet, the stillness, the steady breath of Egypt itself. For Egypt was always more than kings or officials, more than whispers or crowns. Egypt was the river, the desert, the eternal sky. And these, unchanging, held the people in their embrace, soothing them as a mother soothes her child. And now, dear listener, let the story rest, as Egypt rests beneath its stars. Imagine the Nile? Silver in the moonlight, its waters carrying secrets through the night. Imagine the desert, vast and endless, its sands cool beneath the blanket of darkness. The pharaoh sleeps, the official dreams, the people drift into slumber. All is quiet, all is still. Let your own breath slow, steady as the rivers flow. Let your thoughts soften, like sand, slipping through your fingers. The story has ended, but the peace remains. Sleep now, as Egypt sleeps. Dream now, as the stars dream. Rest, for all is well.